EzeeLinux Q&A, Episode 13, Facebook Edition, Phase 1, in which Doris gets her oats. Greetings and salutations. Thank you for clicking on the video. I do appreciate it. And it is time, yet again, for another Q&A episode, and this time around, all of our questions come from folks on Facebook, because that is where I let everybody know that I was intending to do a video like this, and I got a bunch of really great questions. I wanted to get some different questions, and we certainly do have that in this episode. So thank you very much to everybody who responded. We will get to your questions shortly. First of all, I want to share some numbers with you. As of just before I started recording this video, the YouTube channel has 37,794 subscribers, and Facebook has 3,172 likes on the EzeeLinux page. Those numbers are awesome, and I want to say thank you to everybody who has subscribed, everybody who has commented, everybody who has contributed, everybody who has followed these videos, everybody who follows on Facebook. Thank you very much. It is awesome. And it's very humbling as well, because in my adult life, I have lived in many towns that were way smaller than a population of 37,794. So that's just unbelievable to me. It's a number that I have a hard time imagining, that all these people want to follow these videos. So it's very cool. And it is a privilege to do this because I get to talk to people all around the world. And it's just amazing to me. Every day I get all kinds of messages in my email box and on Facebook and through YouTube. And lately, the interest in Linux has just exploded. I don't know what's going on, but it's like every day I'm talking to 5 or 10 or 15 people who are telling me the same story, that they have just installed Linux, they're just about to install Linux, and it's just amazing to me. So thank you very much to everybody who takes the time to watch these videos and follow on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. It's just absolutely awesome. On to the questions, and we got some really cool questions. I want to thank everybody who sent me a question on Facebook. I announced that on Friday, actually, that I was going to do this, and it filled up so quick. I said I was going to do it on Monday, but it's Sunday, and I got so many questions, I'm just going to go on with it, and I've used almost all of the questions that I got. There's a few that I'm not going to be able to answer here, but I answered you on Facebook, okay? So the first one comes to us from Anthony Willis, and he says, "You're not a fan of OpenSUSE. Why not? I find it a rock-solid, stable distro. No problems in 2 years of using it, and highly recommended by me. It even has its own secure boot to help out with the UEFI installation problems." Okay, well, first of all, Anthony, thank you for the question. Second of all, I'm happy that it has worked so well for you, because you are kind of lucky in that respect. I have had many people come to me over the years and said that they have had negative experiences with OpenSUSE for one reason or the other. And so it seems to me that OpenSUSE can be very problematic for certain users, and especially people who are just starting out in Linux. And so therefore, I'm not a fan. You're absolutely correct. I think it's a distribution that has a lot of promise, and they have a lot of really good ideas, but I don't think that a lot of the stuff that you get when you actually install it is all that well executed. And I think the problem is that there's just not much follow-through on a lot of things with OpenSUSE. I'm not trying to put the entire project down. There's some really good people who are involved with OpenSUSE. I think the biggest problem with OpenSUSE is the fact that it is a Linux distribution which is designed by committee. And so therefore they have all kinds of folks pulling it in different directions, and in some ways it really doesn't have a central focus, and so therefore I think that contributes to the problem. I think also another problem with OpenSUSE, or at least in my opinion, is that it's an RPM distro. I am not a fan of RPM-based Linux. That's the Red Hat package manager. So if you're dealing with Fedora or OpenSUSE, which are the two big ones that use it, I always run into the same issue. I can't find an RPM package. It's not in the repos. OpenSUSE has the one-click install, which I think is really cool, but some of those repositories that it hooks up to are kind of shaky. It's just kind of weird to me. It's very diffused, and it's hard to get going. And I personally have never run OpenSUSE for more than a week at a stretch. And the last time that I tried to use it, it just simply would not work. And I really wanted it to really bad. So I installed it in a virtual machine. I had problems. I installed it on this computer, had problems. Installed it on that computer, had problems. I finally had to just give up and walk away from it. And it's like I said, a lot of what I do is designed for new users, people who are just starting out. And OpenSUSE is just not for that kind of user. It's for somebody who is an intermediate to an advanced user and are willing to take the time to tinker with it to get it to work and get it to do what they need it to do. And if that works for you, that's absolutely great. But it doesn't work for me. So that's my take on OpenSUSE. Talk about transferring files from phones, phone files. Hi, Joe. How about some thoughts on copying files from mobile phones on Linux? It's one thing that would stop me recommending Linux to people. Keep up the good work. Regards, Dermot. So that's from Dermot Connolly. What a cool name that is. I don't think I've ever met anybody named Dermot. Okay, so if you have an Android device, it's actually quite easy to transfer files back and forth from Linux if you have a current distro like Ubuntu 16.04, Linux Mint, something like that. What you do is you go into your Android device and you go into the settings and then you activate MTP, which is Media Transfer Protocol. And if that is activated and you've got that set up, what's going to happen is that when you plug your phone into your computer with a USB cable, it should allow you to use that phone just like you would use a thumb drive, and you will be able to copy files off of the phone and also put things on the phone. So that is pretty easy peasy. Now, if you're using an iPhone, that's a different story. Syncing an iPhone to Linux seems to be a head scratcher these days. I had a friend of mine the other day who was trying to sync his iPhone with a Linux Mint 17.3 machine, and it wasn't going to happen because Apple seems to have made that more difficult after iOS 10. We didn't find a solution for that, I'm sorry. But for Androids, it's really not that big a deal. Now, around here, I got a bunch of little Android devices, and I don't do any of that. We just use like the cloud, because the only thing that we transfer back and forth from the phone to the computer is like pictures and videos and little snaps we take like that. And so, therefore, what we do is just throw them up on Google Photo long enough to be able to get them to the computer. And it's mostly for doing things like eBay pictures and stuff like that. So that's how we do it. We just throw it up on the cloud. So I'm really not the best person to ask because I personally don't use cell phones much. But that's how we're getting around that right now. I'm sure that I could do MTP and plug them into the computers, but we don't need to. Used to take SIM cards in and out and plug them into computers. I don't do that anymore, basically because I blew up all my SIM card readers by using them so much. So I had to find another way to do it, man. It's the truth. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Now, this one comes from John Christopher Spoonamore, and his name is in here twice simply because I forgot to cut his name out here when I was copying this over to this text file to make it nice and big and easy for you guys to see. He says, I'm trying to think of something worthy, but right off the top of my head, Joe, what new Linux tech gets you excited these days? And John, by the way, is one of the really cool, enthusiastic people who follow the Facebook page, and he's always jumping in, helping other people and making comments. So thank you, John. I do appreciate it. What gets me excited? Well, I got two things that really make me happy right now. The first one is the Ubuntu 18.04 long-term support release that's coming up in April of 2018. I am anxiously awaiting that. I think that is going to be an incredible release of Linux. I have been following Ubuntu 17.10 very closely, which we all know these interim releases are nothing but betas for the LTSs. And so I've been watching what they've been doing, and it looks really cool. There is so much that they have tweaked and polished and worked on, and lots of bugs have been fixed and little nagging things that have been going on in Ubuntu for a long time. They have focused on things like Bluetooth and internet and just all kinds of really groovy stuff going on. So I'm very excited about that. The other thing I'm very excited about is the rise of hardware that is built specifically to run Linux. Out of the gate, you know it's going to work, and that is from companies like System 76. Dell is providing a big line of computers right now. HP does it. In Europe, there's a company called Intraware doing that. And it's just a really great way for somebody to get started with Linux because, you know, the biggest problem with Linux historically has been getting it running on a computer that you can then get to learn how to use it on. And if you don't already know a great deal about it, and if you run into a bunch of problems trying to install it on hardware, you know, that's really going to put you off the system. But if somebody gives you a computer that you just log in, you create an account, you start using it, I think that's really cool that that's out there. And it is a growing market, and a lot of little companies are popping up all over the place to do that. And I think with the way Microsoft has really pushed things like UEFI, Secure Boot, and some other changes to the hardware that Windows runs on, that we're getting to a place where that's the way it's going to be. It's like we're going to get to a place where it's going to be like Mac, you know, like a Mac runs the Mac OS and it won't run anything else very well. And then we're going to have Windows computers and we're going to have Linux computers, and that's the way it's going. And that's not necessarily all a bad thing, although I do talk to people who build computers and that kind of makes them worried. And I'm like, well, you know, you're building computers, do your research. There's plenty of great parts out there. But for somebody who's not a computer genius, who doesn't want to build their own machine, buying a computer with Linux already on it is a great way to start. So that makes me very, very excited. Okay, we got a double whammy question here. Hello, I have a couple of questions. Yeah, I already said that. I was wondering what I can do to fiddle around and learn more Linux, Bash, general working knowledge without internet access. Mine is so slow, I'd rather not use it other than updating. I was also wondering what is the most stable video editing software I can find. The ones I've been using, OpenShot and others, have been crashing mid-workflow. What are your suggestions? Well, the first part, if you want to learn about Linux, you can always buy a book. Yeah, I'm talking about a paper book with pages in it, and you don't even need to charge it up before you read it. You can read it anywhere. It's awesome. And there's a bunch of really great books out there about Linux. There's a couple that I really like. One of them is called The Linux Command Line, and the author's name is Shotts, S-H-O-T-T-S. And there's another one out there that I've recommended on more than one occasion, just simply called How Linux Works. And they are available from No Starch Press. So both of them have this picture of a robot on the front of them. Those are really good books. And there's just tons and tons of books out there. You can learn how to program. You can learn how to write, work with Bash, terminal, all that stuff. Now, you want to get something that's relatively up to date. But a lot of the really basic stuff that you want to learn anyway hasn't changed in 10, 20 years in Linux. So you can even get an older book and maybe learn, but not too old, okay? We're talking about something that's talking about Linux within the last 3 to 5 years at least, okay? But that's one way to do it. Also, every command pretty much that's on your computer has some sort of help file that goes along with it, like commands at the terminal. If you want to learn something about a command, just type in man and it'll bring up its manual page. There's also the info pages. You can learn more about that. There's a lot of documentation that comes with your computer, and you say you're using Linux Mint 18, you can read that user guide. That's on there as well. So yeah, check it all out. I mean, there's a lot of ways to learn other than being on the internet. And I like reading books. I guess I'm old school that way. Now, to move on to your question about video editing, I haven't tried OpenShot in a long time. I know that they've made a lot of changes to it, and it's getting better all the time. The one that I have had the most success with in the past is KDNLive. And KDNLive is a bit of a pain to get running on Linux Mint 18. You just have to install some extra packages on there. There's some things that it needs to run properly. So you want to look up on the internet, sorry about your slow connection, how to install the KDNLive on there. But that one will work really well. There's another one that I've heard good things about called Lightworks, and that's more of a professional editor. And that is one that's proprietary. I think there's a free version, and then you have to pay for if you want more features or whatever. But that runs on Linux as well. I personally don't use video editing these days because when I make these videos, I just do them on the fly. And I just post them the way they are. And the reason why I do that is time. I don't have time to sit and edit video and render video and all this other stuff. I need to get this up and running and out the door quickly. And if I had to edit and render every video you saw, you would see much fewer videos on this channel. That is for sure. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say. One more caveat on this before I move on. Hardware really matters when you're doing video editing, so you want to make sure that you have a pretty beefy graphics card and that the machine is got a powerful processor and as much memory as you can stuff in it. If you're trying to do this on a laptop with 4 gigs of memory, integrated Intel graphics, and then it's got a 320 gigabyte drive on it, old spinning hard drive, you might be having problems with things crashing. The machine just gets overwhelmed. Video editing takes a lot of juice, let's put it that way. So the best hardware you have is where you want to do that for sure. Okay, please recommend some backup tool. By the way, do we give him credit? Sam Sanderson. Thank you for the question, Sam. Need to read the name. Some people aren't reading this. Some people are doing other things and just listening to the video. So thank you for the question, Sam. I appreciate it. Please recommend some backup tool to back up only files and folders, not in tar file, like folder-to-folder backup, and what file system will be best for backup drive. And thanks for your good work. I asked question in mini site of Linux person, but they didn't have time to answer the question. I'm sorry about that. Also, is there any tool software to defragment NTFS file system? So let's break this down. First thing, let's talk about backups, and I think I understand what you're talking about. I am not a fan of backup programs at all. None of them that come with your Linux distributions. There's backups that comes with Ubuntu, and then there's another one that comes with Linux Mint, and I don't use any of them. What I use is rsync because it does exactly what you want it to do. Rsync makes an exact copy of whatever data you want to back up. And the really nice thing about rsync is that it's on every single Linux machine you'll sit down in front of. There is also a graphic tool for rsync called grsync. So if you will go to my channel and you will do a search for grsync, you will see exactly how to use it, because I have posted a couple of videos about that particular tool, and I use it to back up computers. Let's talk about file systems. The best file system for putting your backups from your Linux machine are our Linux native file systems, and I would recommend ext4. I recommend ext4 for laptops and desktop computers for your main file system as well. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I don't like OpenSUSE. Going back to that question is that they try to install with Btrfs, and they also try and make XFS for a home partition. I'm not a big fan of that. I think that those file systems are not stable enough for the average desktop, especially if you don't have a UPS, and ext4 is very robust. So that's the one that I always recommend for home type use. Now, if you are going to have to share those files with a Windows machine at some point, then you will have to use NTFS. But the problem with that is that NTFS doesn't necessarily carry over all of the file permissions that from your Linux machine, and there's differences in how files are named. There's slightly different rules there. So NTFS, while you can read and write from your Linux machine to it, is not necessarily 100% Linux compatible. And if you were going to actually use it to back up Linux files, then you cannot do a one-to-one restore from that. You're going to have to just drag and drop, because it's going to just ignore all the file permissions. So yeah, if you're going to be backing up to your Linux system and you want to do one-to-one things, then you definitely want to be using ext4. So, is there any tool or software to defragment NTFS file system? Not from Linux. You can't do anything to NTFS from Linux, except I think that you can use FSCK to see whether the file system is mountable. That's about it. But Linux does not get into NTFS. It can't defragment it. It can't repair it. It can't do anything with it, which is why it is never, ever, ever, ever a good idea to have an NTFS partition on a hard drive which is hooked up to a Linux machine that does not have access to Windows. Okay, if you're talking about a backup drive, you can always plug that into your Windows machine, and then you can run check disk on it and make sure that the file system is okay and you don't have any errors going on or the chance of corrupting data. But NTFS is a sucky file system, and what it will do is it'll break itself over time. And so therefore, if you can't run check disk on it, then you got a problem. And you want to make sure that you're not using it inside your Linux system where it doesn't have access to anything else. And no, there's just no way to defragment it. Linux will read and write to NTFS, yes, but the main reason that exists is just so you can transfer like regular files over. You can't do any special files, and you can't. It doesn't keep the same permissions when it does that, and so therefore it's just a compatibility, little thing there. Make it easier for people to come to Linux from Windows. It's an open source way to read NTFS. And it doesn't work in reverse, by the way. Windows cannot read ext4 or XFS or ButterFS or any of the other Linux native file systems without third-party software installed. So there it is. Hope that answers your question. And that's Shabir Ur Rahman. And I know I just tore your name up, but thank you so much for your question. Honestly. My first Linux distro. What was the first Linux distro that you tried and liked when you switched from Windows? Mine was Ubuntu 14.04. Okay, so that is kind of a complicated question because I started fooling around with Linux at home seriously probably about 2007. So the first Linux distro that I saw was probably Ubuntu 7.10. And then maybe the next one that I tried was, I know it was Ubuntu 8.04. And I started fooling around with Linux Mint, but they didn't take over Windows. It took me a while to get used to Linux. And then Ubuntu 10.10 Maverick Meerkat came along. That was tempting. I almost completely dumped Windows at that point, but I didn't. And it was probably when Ubuntu 12.04 came along that was the first time that I had set aside a computer that, okay, this is going to be my Linux computer, was when 12.04 was going along. Now, I've always had it running in virtual machines and on junk hardware playing with it, but I mean, this 12.04 laptop was one that I was going to use, and so that was when it really started. But what got me to a point where I finally said, okay, I can completely dump Windows, I'm ready to just move away from it, was Ubuntu 14.04. Actually, Ubuntu 13.10, but when 14.04 came along, I installed it. It worked. Everything was perfect. There was no problems. I was like, okay, I'm gone. I've got everything I need. Up until, I'd say, Ubuntu 12.04, and there are some people who are going to crucify me for saying this, Ubuntu was really not ready to be a replacement for Windows. There was just problems with it. And way back in the mid-O's, like 06, 05, 06, there was a lot of noise being made about Ubuntu, but it really had a lot of nagging issues in it and some instabilities, and it didn't do accelerated video very well. I mean, there was all kinds of problems with it. But by 12.04 and then 14.04, they had gotten that all worked out, and it just worked perfectly. So at that point, that's when I threw up my hands and I said, I'm not doing this no more. I'm going to use I'm getting totally off the Microsoft merry-go-round, and I'm going to use Linux. And that's what I have done. Never looked back, and very happy I made that decision. And I'm very sorry that I waited so long to do it, to tell you the truth. Okay, and that question kind of leads into this one. By the way, that one that we had before was from Marcos Melendez. I hope I got your name right. Thank you. And let's see, my background. Greetings, Joe. I'd like to know about your background in Linux. How do you get to know the system as you know? Online training or college? Thanks. Okay, well, my first experience with a Unix-like operating system was Unix. I mean, just straight up Unix. It was a system called Basis. Right out of school, I got a job at a big radio station, and they had a mini computer that was running Unix, and they had terminals all over the building, and it was a very traditional system where we had an administrator there who gave you a password, and mine was like Joe C, and then I remember what my password was too. It was WOWO, because for some reason or other, he wanted the passwords to be 4 characters long. So I said WOWO, which is a radio station in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it's a long story why I chose that, but I can actually remember that because I used this computer for 4 years. And it was the central computer that brought in all of the news wires. We had UPI, AP, we were a CBS affiliate, so we had the CBS wires. And this was the late 80s, and so this was before, quote unquote, the internet. So this was a really cool machine. Now, unfortunately, I never got into how it worked. I was just a user. I was too busy doing other things, but I still thought it was very cool. And it was not graphically based at all. We had green screen monitors. These were like those green amber screen monitors all over the place. So it was totally text-based. It was 100% Unix. And that's, so I kind of liked working with that machine. And then I kind of got off into working with automation systems after that. So I left that job, and then the next job that I took, this was right when automation systems were coming into radio. And so therefore I started to learn about how to use those, and then later on I taught myself how to program them. And at that time, all of that stuff ran on DOS, and then later on it migrated to Windows. And then the first time that I ever saw Linux was I took a break from radio for a while. I went to work for Gateway Computer, and there we had a computer lab, and in that computer lab they had a machine running Caldera OpenLinux, like version 1.3. That was the first time that I'd ever sat down in front of a Linux box, and it was running KDE1, and I was like, this is cool. So I went out and got a book, and I started to read about Linux. And then, of course, I went back into radio. That would have been about 1999, I think, when I was working for Gateway. I wasn't there for very long. I only worked for a little while in the computer lab. And then I moved on back to radio, and I started working with the automation systems again. So now we're into Windows, 98, and we're into a bunch of other stuff. And then I started thinking about Linux seriously again in the mid-2000s, like I said before, because that was right after Windows Vista came out. And Windows Vista was just a horrible thing, and I started to be really interested in it. So over the years, I played with it and played with it and played with it, and then in 2014, when 1404 came along, and Linux Mint, the corresponding Linux Mint version there, I was just so impressed with that. I said, okay, it's time for me to get off Windows. I did, and then I started posting little things about it on YouTube. And in the Windows world, I have, by the way, a TSP, which is a Technical Support Professional Certificate, and I have one of the old engineers, which is like the MSCE or whatever that thing is. It's really old now, and I don't even have the paper anymore because it was so far back. But in Linux, what happened was I started to post videos about Linux, and people really liked them, and then I wanted to contribute back to the community, and I wanted to do this project. So I decided I actually needed to get some official training. So what I got was the Linux 101 from the Linux Foundation, just to make sure that I knew what I was talking about. I've already been playing with Linux for 10 years. That was a really great course, and I passed it with a 97, but I didn't pay the money to get the certificate, and I didn't go on to... there was a couple other classes that you could take, and then you could get your system administrator's certificate from the Linux Foundation. And I just haven't pursued it yet, but I did take that one course, which was really awesome. And that was before I started the EzeeLinux project, because I had this idea for doing this. So that's how I learned. Now, where you learn, read books. That Linux course is available through edX, so you can actually audit the class for free. There's a lot of training out there. You just got to search around for it. So there you go. I mean, I know that's a long answer, but you asked about my background, so I figured I would tell you. When I was a kid in high school, this was back in the days when we had Apple IIs. I had a Commodore at home at that time, and then my brother he was a little older than me, a little hipper, and he got himself an IBM PC, and this was running DOS, like real early DOS, and it had a 20 megabyte hard drive in it. So that's how far back I go, okay? I really wasn't all that interested in computers until I started doing the automation stuff, and then it became, I had to learn computers out of panic. So it took me a long time to be good at computers. It wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. Didn't start out as a computer nerd, man. I was a radio guy. So thank you. And I'm going to mess up your name. I'm going to say it, though. I'm going to try. Aluzio Rolam. Thank you. I probably just tore that up. Kernel confusion. I've used Ubuntu and Mint in the past, but I get frustrated. Every time a new release of that particular distro came out, something critical always happened to the Linux part of my system. It crashed and was unrecoverable, at least at my level of use. So I got tired of losing my data and stopped using Linux. But I later found out that I may have been able to avoid these problems by updating the kernel. But how do you do this, and does it help prevent these problems inherent in Linux? First of all, these problems are not inherent in Linux. Let's start from the beginning here. First of all, the kernel upgrades in Ubuntu and Linux Mint are things that get installed. There's a difference between upgrading a kernel and upgrading the entire system, so I'm having a hard time understanding what you're talking about a little bit here. But if you're going to reinstall, then you're going to... See, I'm a little confused because he's talking about kernels and then he's talking about upgrades, which is the reason why I posted this question. Something critical always happened to the Linux part of my system. That makes me think you're dual booting, so you're trying to upgrade a dual boot, which is a problem in and of itself. It crashed and was unrecoverable, at least at my level of use, so I got tired of losing my data. Well, okay, so if you're running a dual boot and you're going to attempt an upgrade, one thing that you absolutely positively need to do is to make sure that you have everything backed up. Never, ever upgrade a system, an in-place upgrade or an attempt to reinstall or whatever, without backing up your data. It makes it a lot easier, and to tell you the truth, I don't think I have ever attempted an upgrade in place on a dual boot. I'm assuming that you have a dual boot, so that may or may not have been the problem as well. Now, going on about this upgrading the kernels in Linux, when you install a Linux system, there is usually a mechanism there to get you security updates for your kernel. So you're talking about Ubuntu. Ubuntu automatically does that. You install it, and when a new kernel comes along, it will install it for you, and you don't have these problems. So you're pretty much up to date. That's how that works. And with Linux Mint, there's a tool in there that allows you to choose which series of kernel you want. Kernels are so confusing, I know that. But I think you're kind of confusing things a little bit here. First of all, don't start off with a dual boot. Second of all, pick a long-term support version of Ubuntu or Linux Mint and go with that and let it upgrade itself. And number 3, if you have sensitive data on the machine, make sure that you back it up. Stay away from dual boots. Unless you absolutely understand how they work, they can be very problematic for some users. Looks like that's the case for you. So that's how I answered that question. And Duke Lom was the guy's name. So thank you very much. Skype on Linux. Skype support for Linux. Why has it stopped? And what are the plans for a replacement? Suggestions for a replacement and why? And I'm not going to try and say your name, but let's just call you Anna Trepa there. Georgios Gawiger. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm not going to try. Beautiful name, though. Okay. Skype support for Linux. First of all, Microsoft has done what they do to everything that they buy with Skype, and that is that they gobble it up and they kill it. So you're actually in a situation where Skype is sort of dying off anyway, and it doesn't really matter. They stopped they discontinued one client, and the last that I saw is that they were working on a beta web client where it would work through your web page and that sort of thing. But I had that up and running for a while, and then that quit working, so I gave up. Now, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of alternatives for Skype out there. There is the Facebook, the Facebook video chat. There's Google Hangouts. There are several open source replacements for Skype. I don't think Skype is really that big of a deal anymore, and I'm kind of glad to see it go. Like I said, the last time that I tried to log into it from the web client, it didn't work. So I gave up on it. I don't use Skype, and I have not had the need to use Skype in probably a year with anybody. Because if I do any conferencing, it's going to be through Google Hangouts or Facebook or something like that. So unless you have a specific reason for needing Skype, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And as far as why they've stopped supporting Linux and what they're doing, you're going to have to ask Microsoft about that. So there you go. Linux in school. What distribution would you recommend for schools? Bit of irony. I'm working on a school-oriented OS myself right now. Well, I've never really put a whole bunch of thought into that. There is an educational version of Ubuntu called like Edubuntu. I don't know anything about it, but it already exists. It's an educational thing. And then, of course, what a lot of schools are going to right now, and you're going to really hate me for this, and a lot of people are going to probably throw tomatoes at the screen, and I don't care. A lot of schools right now are buying Chromebooks. Google is doing a really good job of making that hardware available, and they also lock down that thing so that the kids can't get to something that they're not supposed to. My daughter is in high school. She was issued a Chromebook. That Chromebook doesn't do anything that school doesn't want her to do on it, and I mean nothing. So it's pretty amazing. As far as like if you're going to teach Linux is concerned, then in a school type situation, you would probably want to have a variety. You would want to have Ubuntu. You would want to have OpenSUSE. You would want to have CentOS, because Red Hat you'd have to pay for. You'd want you'd want to have a bunch for people to be able to play with and teach the differences. So yeah, that's as much as I know about it. But to be honest, what the schools are going after now, what they're doing now is they're doing this Chromebook thing, which actually makes me a little bit happier because I've seen one. I've actually sat down and played with it, and I know what they do. And the kids are discouraged from putting social networks on there, and it's just for school, which is fine. So, yeah. Now, a lot of people are going to jump up and down, scream and yell, and go, Google, that's a proprietary OS. It certainly is, but it's better than Windows. That's for sure. So, thank you, Dominic Hayes, for that question. What do I think of Wayland? This question comes to us from Jordan Caratini. Here's what I think of Wayland. I don't think Wayland's ready for anything yet. I think Wayland is, right now, I can't get it to run on my hardware because I have NVIDIA, so even if I install Ubuntu where they have Wayland by default, it doesn't come up, so I can't really see it. I know that there's a lot of question marks about Wayland, and that there's a lot of applications that don't work with it or are going to need some sort of X compatibility to work. And then there are things like X forwarding in SSH, which is something I use all the time, and nobody's really sure what that's going to do with Wayland. So I think we're a long way out before it's going to be a viable replacement for X. Quite frankly, I never have figured out exactly why they just didn't go to X12, because we've been on X11 for 25 years, and just redo X, but this is what they're doing. So there you go. It's going to take a long time for Wayland to dig in and to get the hardware support and the drivers written for it and all this other stuff. So for Ubuntu 17.10, I loaded it up. It's running on X. So if it's better, I'm happy about it. If it's just, but if it's just a replacement and I'm not going to see that much of a difference, then I don't know. I got mixed feelings about Wayland, to tell you the truth, but I know it's not ready. Finally, the last question we're going to do in this video. Standard versus rolling release distributions. You prefer the first, like Ubuntu, Mint, etc. Why? Because rolling releases break themselves. Now, it's a really cool idea, and it looks good on paper. A rolling release, for those of you who don't know, is a Linux distribution that when a new version of a piece of software is added to the repositories, you run updates, you get it, and you get the latest piece of software. The thing is, with most rolling releases, you get the latest bugs. And so therefore, you can have unforeseen difficulties, you can have features disappear, you could have your layout change on your software and you're not used to it, that sort of thing. And so therefore, I am more inclined to be in favor of hanging on to things that work for a little bit longer, because the way Linux software is developed, it's in fits and starts, and you have some software that's constantly getting updated and it's changing all the time, and then you have other bits and pieces of the system that really haven't had much done to them in years, but they're still available in the distribution. And so therefore the rolling release thing, it's unpredictable, and especially if you're talking about like a new user that you really want the system to be stable for them until they get more used to it. Like, for instance, I would never sit my mom down in front of a rolling release, because then every 3 days, well, this thing came down and now I can't find this button and the system won't work. No, thank you. I think rolling releases are for people who, for whatever reason, really want to be out there on that cutting edge. But for a workstation environment where you need to be able to sit down in front of that computer, you need to make sure it's secure and you get all your security updates, but jumping version numbers and point releases every couple of 3 days because stuff gets put out that way, that's an issue. So that's my experience with it. When you're dealing with Linux Mint, when you're dealing with Ubuntu, yes, you're not going to get the very latest packages. And sometimes these long-term support releases, when you're 2 or 3, 4 years down the road, some of that stuff in there is pretty old. But to tell you the truth, like, I have one machine in my house running Linux Mint 17.3, which at this point is getting pretty long in the tooth. We're talking about, that's based on Ubuntu 14.04. We're getting ready to get 16.04 come along. But yet it works on that machine, and Cindy uses it, and all of the software she needs is there, and she doesn't care. And she just wants it to keep working. So those are the kind of people that I work with, and that's kind of the way I am. I like to kind of be able to investigate change and play with it first and know what's coming and read the release notes and know whether this is going to work for me before I install it or recommend it to other people. And that's why I like the more traditional, released, numbered releases over time sort of thing. And even when I use Ubuntu, I don't really bother with interim releases. I use the long-term support versions because they're going to be supported for a really long time. And if I like it, good, that sort of thing. If I absolutely positively have to have an updated piece of software for Ubuntu, a lot of times the later version is available in the PPA, in a PPA that's put up by the developer. No problem. We have snap packages now coming to Ubuntu. When they get that worked out, all of this crap's not going to make that much difference because a snap is going to be maintained by the developer. So, stability, that's the main reason there. So thank you for watching the video, gang. I certainly do appreciate it. Your feedback is always welcome. Please be sure to give EzeeLinux a like on Facebook. Thank you for doing that. Also, check out Facebook, EzeeLinux on Facebook. Check out EzeeLinux on the web. And also check out freedompenguin.com for more about Linux. Lots of cool stories there. freedompenguin.com is a friend of the EzeeLinux project for show. And I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things that have changed for those of you who are just hanging around. Just one thing I wanted to mention before I wrapped up this video. Now, in some of my past videos, if you're just new to the channel, you're going to see that I'm talking about offering one-on-one support for a fee. I really don't do that anymore, gang. And I can't really take it out of the old videos. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm really moving away from doing that because I can help more people doing what I'm doing right now, which is doing videos and working through email and stuff like that. And I do have some clients that I worked with when I first started EzeeLinux, and I was doing that on a regular basis that I will continue to work with. But a lot of times these days, I'm not doing that. So I'm just letting you guys know that's a decision that I have made. I am moving in a different direction here, and just keeping things very flexible instead of being a more structured, like, doing it one-on-one. I like to work with people one-on-one, but it's a time thing. It's, a typical Linux install, when I'm walking somebody through it, especially if they're a novice, is 4 hours. I don't have it. I ain't got it no more. I can't do that. So it's like, between having the kids in high school and the other things that I'm into, and keeping up with everything that goes on YouTube and the emails and everything, I really devote, at this point in time, I spend a great deal of time answering emails. I spend a great deal of time talking to people already, and so therefore I'm moving in that direction. So just to let you guys know, I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you for watching the video. We will do this again soon. This has been fun. I gotta go. My voice is giving out. Talk to you later. Bye.